Okay, let's start.
Look at this. These are mangrove trees stopping big waves from reaching a coastal community. This is the height of a wave on a normal windy day, and this is how much it can increase during a wind surge. And here's a wave being stopped by mangroves.
Trees are amazing. Look at the roots of mangrove trees. How can those unstable-looking roots be stopping that? Turns out, mangrove trees are master engineers when it comes to stopping floods.
About 15 million people live along mangrove coastlines and depend on mangroves as buffers against storms and floods.
Unfortunately, about 20% of the world's mangrove forests have disappeared. And with sea levels rising and hurricanes becoming more and more intense, it's crucial that we protect mangrove forests.
Without mangroves on our shores, we don't just hurt human infrastructure. Losing entire mangrove forests can disrupt local microclimates and eventually the climate as a whole.
So can't we just build seawalls to stop floods? Or how about replanting mangroves? Well, it's not all as simple as it seems.
I spoke to a tree planting expert, Peter van Middelhout, who just recently visited one of our newest tree planting partners in Kenya, Veritree and Earthlings, who are restoring mangrove forests.
Turns out, we weren't doing everything right either. But first things first.
Never seen this before.
How do mangroves work? Well, first of all, mangrove forests are one of 31 wetland ecosystems, which are, as you might know, places where land and water constantly interact.
Such as marshes or swamps, for example. Now, mangroves are wild because they can survive in salt water. To handle the salt in seawater, mangroves have developed a filtration system.
Their leaves let go of excess salt through tiny pores before shedding them. It's like they have a built-in desalination plant. And of course, when the leaves reach the ground, they decompose, feeding the microbes and marine life that make up the base of coastal food webs. In fact, mangrove forests are one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, home to many species of invertebrates, insects, marine life, birds, and mammals,
including the Bengal tiger in India, who thankfully I didn't meet. You can watch the vlog up here to understand what I'm talking about. But back to the mangroves. Despite them only covering 0.5% of tropical coastlines, mangroves are crucial for the climate as a whole.
That's because they absorb CO2 up to 4 times more efficiently than other plants.
Okay, now to those crazy-looking roots. This is my favorite part, because this is the real engineering genius of mangroves.
There's different species of mangroves, but it all works roughly the same way. Most mangroves have 2 types of specialized roots. Stilt roots arch down into the mud, anchoring the tree against strong currents and storms. Aerial roots are these things sticking up like snorkels and which can draw in oxygen directly from the air, which is crucial because soil in coastal areas is waterlogged and low in oxygen, meaning the trees can't rely on underground roots alone to get the air they need.
So mangroves absorb water like a sponge at a high tide, and then they slowly release it when the tide is low again. It's not a perfect metaphor, but that's how mangroves help stabilize the soil around a coastline, which brings me back to this.
Let's look more closely at what's happening here. So with those dense roots anchored into the soil, as we just saw, what mangroves are doing is slow down the waves. Weaker waves means less force hitting the coast. Floods are driven by wave energy and water movement, so mangroves help slow and break up waves before they reach the land, which lowers the risk of coastal destruction. So it goes less wave energy, weaker floods, safer coastlines.
A study found that mangrove forests can decrease wave energy by 13 to 66% over a distance of 100 meters, depending on some factors like how tall the trees are or how dense the forest is, for example.
Here's a video I found on YouTube that shows really well how that helps to hold entire shorelines. In this experiment, students recreated a storm surge at different potencies. Look at what happens to the part on top that has trees and the one that doesn't. Over time, the sediment that mangroves are trapping builds up, creating and holding soil in place. Their roots essentially act like natural nets, anchoring the shoreline and preventing erosion, especially during storms or high tides.
And as I said before, the roots are also filtering water, which helps protect the coral reefs and all marine life. But we're losing mangrove forests.
The primary causes are the usual ones: conversion to farmland, aquaculture, agriculture, or the urbanization of coastlines. In 2022, an assistant professor at Stockholm University estimated that over the past 3 decades, we've lost mangrove forests larger in size than Tokyo.
That's not just costing us entire ecosystems, it's also costing us loads of money.
Here's one example. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy ravaged the Caribbean and the coastal mid-Atlantic region of the United States. A regional study done later showed that wetlands avoided $625 million in direct flood damages during the hurricane in the US alone.
Now, these were not just mangrove forests, but wetlands at large.
As this map shows of one of the coasts hit by the hurricane, even the areas more inland, like this one marked in red, benefited from the wetlands, marked in green, further downstream because they helped slow down the floods.
That begs the question whether seawalls could protect coastlines where mangrove forests and wetlands have disappeared.
They can, but
walls like these block the natural flow of water, which stops all those cycles we just saw before and that make wetlands such a unique biodiversity hotspot.
Building and maintaining seawalls is also super costly, and they can crumble under extreme conditions.
This happened in Japan in 2011 when tsunami waves overwhelmed and destroyed them, failing to protect critical areas like Fukushima.
Put differently, we have a natural solution to solve this problem, and not protecting wetlands and mangrove forests affects not only ecosystems, but people's lives.
So why not just restore mangrove forests? That's what we're trying to do. Let's talk to Peter. Hey, Peter.
Hey, Fátima. So this is the coast of Kenya, and it has many mangroves and used to have even more. And here's Kilifi, and that is close to where we plant. Let's zoom in there. These are some of the mangroves a bit more inland. So if you zoom out, you see here's the sea and here are the mangroves. And this is actually a picture from 2020. And what you directly see is, well, there is some green areas here with mangroves, but there's actually a lot of sandy areas as well. If we go back to 2011, you'll see that this looked much greener. So there we go. And this is because there has been a lot of deforestation in the area, particularly during COVID times. Now let's go back to 2020 and let's zoom into those sandy areas. Sandy areas with a high salt content are part of natural mangrove systems. They belong there. So not all the sand areas here used to be mangroves, but many of them actually were. We are restoring some of that. And this is why I went to Kenya to meet with our partner Earthlongs, who works together with Fairy Tree there to restore mangroves. It's not just about planting trees, but it's really also about restoring the hydrology of the mangrove system. When we zoom in here, you see that there's sort of these dark areas around the trees here. And these are the natural channels that go into the mangroves. And they are incredibly important because they feed the mangroves with water. Once you start to remove mangrove trees, because of erosion, these channels start to fill up and they no longer have this function of bringing in water in the system and taking water out of the system. If water comes in, so it gets in with a very high tide, but it cannot go out anymore. And then, of course, the water evaporates and you're basically creating a salt mine. So there's a lot of salt accumulating there in the system and nothing can grow anymore. But this particular region has another problem. If you look around it, you will see that it is actually surrounded by mountains, and deforestation on the hills also caused a lot of sediment to actually wash into the mangrove system. So the system is filling itself with sand. You see some strain patterns here. And this is what was actually a great idea, is that Earthlongs, our partner, realized water needs to get into the system. So this is where they started to experiment by digging these trenches here and planting mangroves on the sides of it. What was not so good about it is that this was not so well yet connected with the open water, with the channel here. And also you see that the natural channels actually have organic shapes, and they have done the channels more into straight lines here. This natural shape here is what we know from river deltas. This is just how water really likes to flow. It's a shape that makes sure that water gets most effectively distributed into the system and out. Because of how the water naturally wants to flow, many of these trenches will again fill up with sediment, or they will not be connected to the main channel anymore, and therefore no longer have this kind of breathing function of the water. It's hot, there's mud, but we're doing fine.
And so let's say you're planting the right tree in the right place and you got the trenches right. How do we make then sure that the trees we restore will actually stay there for decades to come?
Indeed. Short-term digging of trenches as well in the nursery is actually providing some great job opportunity to the people there. But at some moment the work will be done. And Earthlongs and Fairy Tree are creating alternative livelihoods for the people that now work in the mangroves. The one is beehives. Bees really like mangroves, so they have installed different beehives in this system, and it means that the people can start to trade honey. So this is a great additional source of income. They're also doing something different. I told you about these mountains before around the system. So the parts where the villages live, they actually create a living fence of bamboo around the lowest point of these hills. This will make sure that erosion of soil is actually stopped by the bamboo structures here and is not going into the mangrove system. Bamboos, they grow very fast, so they create like a living wall to stop the sand. And at the shade side of the bamboos, they are creating an agroforestry system consisting of bamboo, koa, and fruit trees. And that is really a long-term source of income, where you are both protecting the mangrove system as creating a source of livelihood for the community. Restoration, as we learned at Ecosia, is not so much a technical challenge, but it's more a socio-economic challenge. You have to understand why they're cutting trees in the first place.
What has Ecosia done so far with earthlongs and fir tree?
In this first contract that we signed with earthlongs, we planted 200,000 trees. We just did another contract where we're going to plant an additional 2.5 million trees. I really respect the people that work there. We had to monitor our trees. Then the flood was coming, and we literally saw trees disappearing under the water while we were still counting them. Don't you want to take a shower after a night in the plane? No? There's no point in taking showers before you go into mangroves. So it was fun, but it also means a race against the clock to actually get things done.
What do you hope for this project in the next 5 years?
So my hope is that it will be a sort of a flagship on how sustainable restoration of mangroves can happen, particularly because they include this long-term livelihood element. There's many mangrove projects that think they're doing a good thing because they create jobs. But what happens when the last tree is planted in the region and the project moves to the next area? Then you need to leave a legacy there. And if we can show here how sustainable restoration of mangroves can look, well, then there's a lot of hectares waiting to be using a similar concept.
Well, thanks, Peter. Good luck in your next trip. Hopefully it'll be a bit less muddy.
It will have other challenges, but it will be less muddy, that's for sure. Thanks so much.
There's one thing we didn't go into yet at all in this video, which is what happens if sea levels keep rising? Can mangroves actually withstand that? And if so, until when? I actually asked Peter, but he was already on his way to a next project visit, so here he is.
So mangroves can withstand a sea level rise of around 7 millimeters a year. Currently the rate is around 3.4 millimeters. It can go up to 5 in the coming decades, but it is expected it can go as fast as 10 millimeters a year by the end of the century.
That's not great, but I have some good news. Mangrove deforestation rates worldwide are actually decreasing.
Compared to the decade between 1990 and 2020, the rate at which we've lost mangroves has decreased by more than a half.
That means that since the 2000s, the rate of loss has dropped by a massive 73%, as less mangrove forests are being cut down for farms and cities.
In Southeast Asia, the losses are even lower than expected, which comes to prove that conservation efforts and community engagement actually work.
So you know what you need to do.
If you don't live near mangroves, you can support groups like earthlongs and berry tree. By switching to Ecosia, you can be sure we're financing them and other regeneration projects around the world.
Because it's never about just the one ecosystem. To protect any ecosystem, we need to protect all of them. It's all interconnected.
If you can, research what organizations around you could need some support. Maybe one planting trees in cities or restoring a nearby watershed. As we've seen, community engagement does make a big difference to our ecosystems.
Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if we left any questions unanswered, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It makes a huge difference to the algorithm, but also to our hearts. And in case you're new here,
Ecosia is a free search engine and browser. You search as usual. We make money through ads like any other search engine, but we invest 100% of those profits into projects like the one you just saw and other climate actions. You can see exactly how we spend our money through our business reports on our blog.
Thanks again for watching, and see you next time.